Okay, so this is, as we're mentioning, this is a work stream convened by colleagues from UNESCO, UNTAD, UNDESA, and involves several other agencies of the UN system with a mandate to promote STI to achieve the SDGs. My name is Fernando Santiago. I am Industrial Policy Officer at UNIDO, and I will have the pleasure to welcome to this first session and guide you through the first steps. The first session, which is today, will lay the ground and knowledge base for the next two sessions. It will introduce existing approaches and methodologies for policymaking and implementation across UN agencies with discussion on case studies in developing, reviewing, and implementing STI policies and strategies. The session will present examples of how STI policies geared towards achieving the SDGs and strengthening STI systems for better response to current and future crises. Session 2, on November 26, will introduce the concepts of policy instruments, including legal frameworks and funding mechanisms, followed by methodological approaches for the design and implementation of policy instruments across UN agencies. The session will also illustrate how to use or adapt existing STI policy instruments to find solutions in times of crisis such as COVID-19. Finally, Session 3 on December 3rd proposes the topic of innovative entrepreneurship, job creation, and discusses how STI policy can foster such activities to promote job creation, growth, and addressing present development challenges. Participants will also consider the implications of introducing SDGs as guiding principles for the design and implementation of STI policy interventions to support innovative entrepreneurship. For today's webinar, or for today's workshop, this is the agenda. After these introductory remarks, we will discuss current approaches to STI policy for the SDGs. Let us know that while in recent times, the emphasis is placed on technology and innovation, we would like to draw your attention onto the important dimension or contribution of science for supporting decision-making. After the thematic sessions, we will present some examples based on concrete experience from UN colleagues, and finally, we will wrap up. For today, we have these colleagues contributing, Professor Loreto Alcorta, who is a professorial fellow on technology, innovation, and sustainable development at UN-IATT, School of Business and Economics at the University of Maastricht. He has been Director of Industrial Policy, Statistics, and Strategic Research at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, where he contributed to the preparation of SDGs 8 and 9. Professor Alcorta will take over moderation during the thematic sessions. I will just do the introductory remarks. Cornelia Tsinova is Assistant Program Specialist in Science Policy and Capacity Building. She joined UNESCO in 2002, where she currently manages STI policy projects, including on capacity building for the development, review, and implementation of policies. She has contributed to the design and implementation of UNESCO's programs and activities in STI policy, such as the Global Observatory on STI Policy Instruments, or GOSPIN. Clovis Freire is economist and computer engineer specialized in technological change and innovation. At UNTAD, he leads the drafting of the Technology and Innovation Report 2020 and technical assistance to the government of Ethiopia in the preparation of a new national STI policy and STI for SDGs roadmap. Cornelia and Clovis together are the focal points of this work stream 6. Pierre Vallot is the head of the Global Environment Outlook program at UN Environment, where he has the role of at least lead. He and his team completed the 6th Global Environment Outlook published in March 2019, as well as 6 regional environmental assessments, also published in May 2016. As part of the 6th Global Environment Outlook, Pierre's team worked closely with more than 160 experts and authors to produce the analysis contained in the publication. As mentioned, my name is Fernando Santiago from UNIDO. On the background, you might not see them, but they're helping us, is Sen-Mei Wang and Despina Susoni from UNESCO. Without further delay, what I would like to do now, let me stop sharing my presentation. What I'd like you to do is please check on your screens if you can find there should be already a link toward exercise in Mentimeter. Here we will start getting a bit more on the topics of this webinar. You see, education is quite an important dimension. I think it's you know, the dimensions of poverty and the challenges that are captured by the SDGs are really diverse, but you can see already, based on your answers, where some of the priorities are. You say quality, so you can also qualify some of the answers, right? So education, but also people have indicated quality education. Yes, poverty and food security. You can see also some of the interactions and some of the relationships that we can see among the SDGs. But for the moment, I will give the floor to my colleague Cornelia Sinova, who will give you the first presentation, the first one of the thematic presentations.
Thank you, dear participants. Thank you very much for attending this first session today on current approaches on STI policy for the SDGs. My presentation will provide some background and thoughts for discussion on approaches in STI policy for the SDGs. I would like to start by saying a few words on the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and its universal and goals and targets called the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, the Agenda 2030 aims to deliver a more sustainable, prosperous, and peaceful global future. And it has set 17 objectives to achieve this mission by 2030. These 17 goals and 169 targets cover all economic, social, and environmental needs for a sustainable future. The SDGs have been accepted by all countries, and they apply to all developed but also least developed countries. They are not legally binding, but governments expected to establish national frameworks for their achievement, and also to monitor and review their progress. All actors are importantly playing a role, and everyone has to do their part: governments, private sector, and civil society. All the SDGs and their targets interact with another, and they're integrated set of priorities and objectives that are fundamentally interdependent. They can have positive but also negative interactions, which means that achieving the progress in one goal can leverage progress in another goal, but it can also delay progress in for another goal. For instance, we know that some technologies can solve certain challenges, but they can also create some challenges and negative impacts on other key challenges. So therefore, understanding these interactions is also key to unlock the full potential SDGs. I think it's never enough to emphasize that STI plays really a key role for achieving all the targets across the SDGs, and particularly targets that concern the human well-being, health, clean water and sanitation, climate change, clean energy, decent work, responsible production, just to name few of these targets. And we know that STI is systematic, and it can only play its full potential role and contribution to these development challenges if we build robust STI systems. meaning with good governance, with well-established organizational structures, involving a variety of institutions and actors, closely also understanding and monitoring what interactions, linkages, exchanges and flows, having also a set of legal framework for the STI system to be effective, and understanding and articulating well the variety of policies, because we have, of course, the STI explicit policy, but we have other policies that are also having an impact on STI, such as agriculture, health, education. And we also have the time dimension, and we need to have a clear also target and goal where does a country want to be in, for instance, 5, 10 years from now. Therefore, to unlock the full potential of STI for SDGs, we need to adopt this systemic approach and multi-stakeholders participation. But let's have a quick look at the STI policy cycle, the different stages, and see how a new challenge for STI policies has emerged with the SDGs, and namely how to embed STI in the Sustainable Development Goal. You see on the slide the different processes, the different policy processes, from priority setting to policy design, to policy implementation, evaluation, and then restarting the reprogramming exercise. And in all these stages, mobilizing actually a variety of stakeholders and adopting participatory approaches is key, and including involving underrepresented and also excluded communities. I think with this, we have ahead of us the challenge of adopting, but also rethinking new approaches for STI policy framework that adopt and take into account these new challenges that are raised by the SDGs. For that, policy frameworks need to focus on a responsive STI, responsive to societal demands for inclusiveness and other societal challenges. I would like now to provide you with a quick outline and flow of issues that an STI policy might address. What are the different items that STI policy might focus on? And here we have, for instance, the framework, the national development plan of the country, with broad goals such as developing research, innovation, science education. Also focus on key sectorial priorities, setting some principles for the governance, the legal framework, different institutions involved and participating in the STI activities, setting and also describing some means for the policy, the instruments, funding mechanisms, integrating aspects on regional, international cooperation, gender and youth, monitoring and evaluation. But beyond I think the traditional STI policy, there are some other strategic STI policy issues that emerge in the context of the SDGs. And here it's important to highlight that there is sort of need and shift from a national to a more international perspective and cooperation. And for that, it's very important also to foster multi-stakeholder partnerships for investment in STI for SDGs, to integrate and have a transition to open science, open access to data and knowledge, open infrastructure, citizen science, to have more transparent and accountable science to society. With the SDGs, also science diplomacy is key. Also giving directionality in STI policy, so that actually these policies could really focus and have some really mission-oriented goals to focus on STI-related targets of the SDGs. Inclusiveness, how to integrate, how to make participate all communities, integrate also indigenous knowledge, have a specific focus on gender. As you know, this is an SDG. SDG 5 is exclusively on gender equality. And also to monitor and measure the contribution of STI to SDGs. And for that also, we need to have some of the STI indicators that address this challenge. There are a variety of methodological approaches and frameworks, but I would like just to mention one, which is the guidebook for the development of STI roadmaps for SDGs, which was developed also with the contribution of different UN entities and partners who have contributed and working towards adjusting their methodologies to this new thinking, new context of in the perspective of the SDGs. And let me just finish with a few questions for thoughts during this session. How to meet goals of environmental sustainability, but at the same time have economic growth. How to reframe STI policy from a unique economic rationale to SDGs perspective. Also, what frameworks for STI are needed for inclusion in decision-making processes, and what priority areas, for instance, for action needs to be undertaken to embed SDGs within the STI policy frameworks. And again, how to define directionality and concrete mission goals to respond to these environmental and societal needs within STI policies. Lastly, just how to align STI governance structures to the global SDGs framework. And here we mean in terms of policy advice, steering and funding, coordination mechanisms, evaluation and monitoring. I will stop here and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia, for giving us an overall perspective of the connections between SDGs and STI. My name is Ludovico Porta. As Fernando introduced a few minutes ago, I'm a professor fellow at the University Maastricht Economic Research Institute for Innovation and Technology, and I will moderate the next few minutes of the discussion. Let me now move on to the next presentation, who's going to be Pierre Boulot from UNEP, who's going to talk about the relationship between science and policy.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in this very interesting discussion. My presentation will focus mostly on producing science for decision-making to be able to produce evidence-based policy. And we will focus on the aspect mostly around the environment, but obviously this production of science can actually be applied to a number of different areas as well. So the production of science for policy is really meant to support governance principles. We want robust policies that are based on a sound understanding of what the problem is, rather than just going on a gut feel. We need to understand the dynamics of how civil society, business, stakeholders might respond to new policies. And to do that, we would need good understanding of the problems that we're facing. So rather than go on this gut feel, which might lead to some unanticipated impacts, we need a body of scientific and policy research that improves over time, and that is more evidence-based and addresses successes and challenges as the information is gathered. From an environmental perspective, UNEP follows a set of guidelines for producing what we call integrated environmental assessments. Of course, environmental challenges are typically complex. They are systemic problems with both human and planetary health impacts and problems. have economic and social impacts with these environmental issues that require a broad set of different mitigation measures. Environmental problems are problems of collective action, basically overuse of resources, creation of pollution by the population at large. And of course, the solutions to environmental problems usually require some sort of collective action to be able to be solved. To do this, we produce these environmental assessments, which bring policymakers and scientists together to produce a document that basically assesses the current state of science and tries to produce it in a language that is understandable by both the scientific community and the policy community. To do that, we typically try and follow the saliency, legitimacy, and credibility paradigm. We want to produce science that is considered legitimate by the user community. So it's not just about producing science for scientists. It's also producing science for policymakers. And so we would like to have the endorsement, or if practical, to have the participation of the policy community in the production of the science as well. We want relevant or salient information for the needs of the end users. So again, having the participation of that user community in the production of the science allows us to make sure that we are producing science that will be useful for them in the long run. And of course, we want to maintain the scientific credibility of the process to produce this science. So we want to follow basic empirical and social science principles that are based on authoritative and convincing information and analysis. So this legitimacy, saliency, credibility triangle really allows us to try and balance these three criteria to be able to produce science that is useful for decision making. As I said, policymakers and scientists typically have different needs and speak different languages, but policymakers need some science to be able to apply this to their policy problems. This allows them to have sound evidence on which to base their policies. And the science is also useful for encouraging collective action. And in order to do that, it must be viewed as legitimate not only by the policymakers, but by civil society and business and other groups as well, non-governmental groups. And of course, the scientists must also see that this science is created in a credible process. Of course, as we go through the production of environmental assessments, which might take a year or more, there are differences of opinion across the scientific community about what the existing literature and data show. And so we usually end up with differences of opinions, changes in approaches as we go through the process. And this is typically a learning process, not only for the scientists, but also for the policymakers who are involved in it. We have a mix of empirical scientists, like chemists and physicists, as well as social scientists who study how society responds to different levers and different problems. And we also have different interpretations from different groups of scientists. They also don't all speak the same language. They also don't all work in the same way. So we have to reconcile this science from different published literature with the opinions and expertise of the different scientists in the process. And we call this assessing the existing literature rather than conducting new research. We're not producing new information. We're just assessing what others have done. And we try in these assessments to create a compelling narrative, a story that is useful for policymakers, that is based on the scientific evidence. And obviously we try and produce information in various different forms, not just in text forms, but also in graphics, maps, and multimedia type of arrangements. To produce an assessment of this kind, we typically want to address a certain set of policy questions, and we have to have clear policy questions and clear policy goals outlined before we start the assessment, because we are trying to identify what the problem is and by when the problem needs to be solved. So usually an assessment will have a forward-looking component to it. That answering of the what and by when is typically combined with some policy analysis, social science, to address how the problem could be solved. And this typically requires you to engage different affected groups, creating partnerships, and designing policies with multiple benefits for different actors, which allows them to deepen their commitment. So I'm using here on the right an example of our recent analysis in the Global Environment Outlook of how much we might need to reduce fossil fuel demand to meet the climate policy goals of the Paris Agreement, which is an environmental agreement that was signed by over 190 countries. And the goal here is really to try and mitigate the impacts of climate change to a point where we might limit global average temperature increase to either 2 degrees or well below that, hopefully around 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we know that energy demand is going to increase by around 50% between now and 2050. In order to meet the Paris Agreement, we actually have to reduce the quantity of fossil fuel in the energy mix by something in the neighborhood of 80% in that time frame. So obviously these policy goals are very complex. This is something that's never been done in any global economy so far, and policymakers are struggling with how to actually implement this kind of policy. So the assessment will tell them what is needed and by when, but then the more challenging task is for the policymakers to pull together the various different actors who might tell them how they might go about this this significant reduction in fossil fuel use. In the assessment, there are some basic guidelines given to the policymakers that they obviously need to reduce demand growth of energy demand. Otherwise, energy demand will simply continue to grow, and there will be no way of trying to of being able to address this growing energy demand. So the reduced demand growth is usually brought in by bringing in energy efficiency policies, and then the rest of the fossil fuel use will have to be done by the implementation of policies that organize the economy. Here's another example related to resource use in fisheries. This is the Chilean abalone fishery example, where the Chilean Environment Ministry wanted to be able to protect fish stocks in their local fisheries and also allow traditional fisheries to flourish. They used an approach that uses common property theory and local scale governance to actually create something called territorial use rights for fishing, or these turfs. And this engaged the local communities in trying to reduce overfishing and poaching of fish by other actors, and have a better stewardship of the fishing resource to be able to maintain its sustainability over time. The communities who were involved in developing the process, which was led by the ministry, took on the responsibility of maintaining these turfs, and they also took on the responsibility of sanctioning anybody who was not obeying these territorial use rights. This allowed the Chilean government to reduce pressure on vulnerable species and reduce this poaching that was going on, and the local communities developed their actual sustainable management of their own fisheries to be able to maintain this over time. It was very important to involve the fish and the industry as well as organizations in the process as well. It wasn't just the fishermen, and they were supportive throughout the whole process. Overall, the policy was very successful. The costs to government were low overall, and this became a community managed resource and really engaged the whole community in being able to pull this forward. So as Cornelia was saying, the directionality of your goals has to be very clear when you're setting up these policies and giving this innovation an opportunity to flourish. My next two slides are really focused on how to use this science in decision making. Of course, when we as scientists are briefing policymakers, we have to put the science into a certain context. This allows policy analysts to take the information and synthesize that science into a set of recommendations and government view on that evidence. The empirical science will likely be included in this policy analysis and combined with different elements of social science, economic analysis, to provide policymakers with a set of comprehensive advice that can be used as they move forward. The evidence or the science can have a forward-looking component to be able to basically say, if you put this policy into place, then these are the likely impacts of that policy over time. So this highlights the longer-term impacts for the consideration of the policymakers. Of course, once we have the policy in place, we have to really track its effectiveness, and this is not an area that governments are particularly good at least in the analysis that we did for the environmental side of things. The policy development cycle is complex and time-consuming, so just getting the policy out the door and implemented is quite challenging. But there needs to be more tracking of the effectiveness of policy and identification of possible failures of the policy, possible unintended impacts, to be able to adaptively manage the policy. So we have to develop some effectiveness indicators that need to be able to track how the policy has been over time. And then we need strategies within governments to react to those indicators and need to ensure that the aspects of the policy approach can be adapted as new data become available. Also, new policies may or could have impacts on other policies, so there is interaction across different policies. We have to consider the systemic impacts of those policies over time as well. So I wanted to thank you very much for your kind attention, and we'll be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Many thanks, many thanks, Pierre, for that comprehensive presentation on how to use science for policy making. While you think, I have two questions that have already been raised for Cornelia's presentation. The first question that we had that has been already raised has to do with the alignment between SDGs and the National Development Plans, Cornelia. The question raised was, how do you make that alignment, that connection between National Development Plans and STI SDGs? I'll raise another question. Is also related to the sectoral approach. How is in relationship to the STI roadmaps, how do you connect when the sectoral approaches? How do you include in the methodologies the sectoral approaches when you are doing STI roadmaps and technology roadmaps? Those are the two questions that we have so far. Cornelia, perhaps you can start, whilst the other colleagues start thinking or raising their hands for questions related to Pierre's or also Cornelia's presentation. Please, Cornelia, can you?
Yes, thank you very much, Ludo, and thank you for these questions. I think the first on the alignment has been raised by our colleague from Ghana, if I'm not mistaken, and indeed it's a great challenge actually, and to work on ways to really have this great alignment on the STI with the SDGs targets, and also having it close to national development plans. I think this is really, and in the case of Ghana, I think the proceeding with first kind of situational analysis of the situation also gives opportunities to identify gaps between, for instance, very critical SDG targets for the country and where STI could be effectively deployed, and also to establish some bridges with the national development plans and see what adjustments might be needed with this effect. On the second question, on the key sectorial priorities, and I think this is a question related to, of course, the road mapping. Focusing on key priorities, of course, wouldn't be as sufficient, and it would be necessary to have a overall understanding, and as the participant raised it very well, not to overlook some of very important and critical cross-cutting issues. I think there should be some complementary approaches, and not excluding, I would say, some of these cross-cutting aspects that are equally important. But perhaps some of my colleagues, and perhaps also Pierre, would like to add on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia. Pierre, you want to add something? Let me then move on to another question has been just raised. No, let me just thank you, Wilhelmina.
Thank you. Yeah, my question goes to the second speaker, and I want a clarification on how the effective instrument for engaging with policymakers after generating the research evidence. What the instrument for engaging? Which ones are, from his experience, which ones are more effective for engaging with policymakers? Thank you.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. That's a very helpful, very useful question. Typically, when we're doing environmental assessments, we usually have a process at the end of the environmental assessment where we try and produce a summary of the findings, 10 or 12-page document that policymakers are involved in creating. And this is a very important document that the policymakers help to summarize the information that's in the assessment. This is called a summary for policymakers, and we usually try and also combine that with a set of what we call science policy seminars to be able to explain the science and collaborate with decision makers in government to be able to explain the science that we've produced. And this is very helpful to make sure that all of the science is properly explained in the context of the country.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Maxwell Otim. I'm all the way in Uganda here. I work with the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation as the Director for Research and Innovation. My first question goes to the first presenter. I want to pick your mind. There is this school of thought that because innovation is cross-cutting, it does not only take place in the space of science and technology, it goes beyond in business, in social sciences, in many aspects. And so there's this school of thought that the innovation policy should be separated from the science and technology policy. What do you think? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Very interesting, and indeed, you rightly posed the aspect on innovation, which is much beyond the technological innovation and goes to social sciences, business, and so on. And I think it's very complementary also to have a STI policy complemented also by some specific innovation strategies at more at local level also, or at sub-regional level also. My colleagues also from other agencies perhaps would have other thoughts on this, and I think this would be also discussed during the session 3. But this is what I would say for now. Thank you.
Pierre, can you add something? Because it involves the relationship between science and technology and innovation. Perhaps you can add something here.
Yes, thank you, Ludo. I do believe that there is a role of having a specific innovation policy to try and bring new ideas to the fore, to be able to address some of the challenges that we face. I've been involved in different research programs that bring that innovation to almost a pre-market stage, basically. However, I think at some point there needs to be a merging of the government science and technological objectives over time, because there can be unanticipated impacts of innovations. I'm thinking specifically of battery technology at the moment. We might end up with a mobile fleet that is electrically powered in the future, but the minerals and metals that go into those batteries actually need some sort of treatment and some sort of recycling to be able to manage this, the potential waste from these batteries, which can be toxic. So we have to merge, I think, the innovation policies that have been developed with eventually the science, technology, and social impact policies that we have.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I have another question here from Purba in Bhutan. Maybe you can ask now the question that you had in mind. Purba, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well. Just go ahead with your question.
I have a question for the first presenter. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It is quite thought-provoking. So I was wondering, how can we actually measure the contribution of STI towards SDGs? Is there any instrument or strategies that is put in place in other countries where we can actually know how the STI could contribute to SDG in terms of, especially in terms of measurement? So that's the question that I would like to ask to Ms. Cornelia. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, on the measurement and also monitoring of the contribution of STI to specific targets of the SDGs, I think it's really a lot of actually institutions are doing research on building some specific indicators that would allow us to measure specifically this contribution of STI to the SDGs. And I think ICSU has already prepared a sort of guiding tool for improved indicators for this. The UNESCO Institute for Statistics as well has started some preliminary work to also work on a set of specific indicators that would allow this measurement. I think also the traditional surveys that countries produce on R&D and innovation also produce indicator that could be really also the basis for measuring this STI versus SDGs and how STI is embedded in the SDGs. But a lot has to be done for getting improved indicators to measure better this contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions, hands raised in the. But I do have here some questions in the chat that I will raise from Quen Sang Top Guy. He's asking whether since the science, technology, innovation comes across all sectors, is it important to have an STI roadmap, or will the sector STI roadmap will be more important, or making a link between the national priorities and the SDGs will suffice? So again, the question of the link between the sectoral STI policies, the national SDG goals, and how approach would be the best in order to make this connection. I just want to open the floor not only to the speakers, but if anybody else or anybody else of the organizers have some ideas regarding, perhaps Fernando, who's been involved in the roadmap, can give us some ideas of how to answer this question. Yeah. Some no takers for the question on the relationship between sectoral, national STI goals, and how do you bring them together in a roadmap, or whether it can be brought together or not. Pierre? Yes?
I'll take a shot from the environmental perspective. Actually, it's
Good.
quite important for us to look holistically at the problems. And so sectoral policies are helpful, but they often have impacts across multiple sectors. And so I think it's important to try and look at the systemic implications of those policies across multiple sectors. And I would encourage that we take systemic approaches to policies. In our Global Environment Outlook, we did 10 chapters on the effectiveness of environmental policy, and we noted that environmental issues that are environmental policies that try and address a single environmental issue are often not nearly as effective as environmental policies that take into account entire systems or the root cause of the environmental challenge. So I would encourage not trying to build too many silos and looking at how systems react to individual policies.
Thank you. I just want to add a question that I've just seen in the chat that may be relevant for all of us. Hello, everybody. I need to know if there is a body that could assist countries like Angola to update its STI Science, Technology, Innovation Policy. So I think this is a question for all of us. How can each one of the different agencies could contribute to aiding countries to develop the STI policy? And I can start by UNESCO, but please, UNTAD, UNEP, you can all answer. How can each one of you help the countries to develop their STI policy? Perhaps you need all of you.
Ludo, if I may start from UNCTAD.
Sure.
I have included in the chat as well. UNCTAD has a program on science, technology, innovation policy reviews, where we assist countries on assessing and updating their STI policies. We are doing that at this moment in Ethiopia, and I will just in a moment I will make a presentation on the country example there. But we also work with many other agencies here in this process. So this is one route, but there are many other ways to do that through other agencies as well.
Thank you. Cornelia, you're there?
Yes, thank you, Ludo. Yes, I can say from UNESCO's side that yes, we accompany member states in, for instance, their efforts to assess the STI system, understand the STI landscape, but also to provide some technical assistance in terms of revising, updating national STI policies. I would like also to say, maybe on behalf of the interagency task team, which has more than 50 UN entities that are active in STI, that we are also trying to provide some, let's say, combined and complementary also cooperation with member states, with our different methodologies, with our different competencies. So this is also a good way for a country maybe to have the experience and perspectives from different UN entities. Thank you very much.
Pierre, UNEP?
I think Cornelia and Clovis have said quite a lot on this. UNEP doesn't have individual work programs in countries. What we try and do is work through the resident coordinator system of the UN, and we try and contribute to the common country analysis that is produced for each country. And in that respect, our contribution is mainly on environmental data and statistics and indicators to be able to help countries understand their environmental situation, which hopefully will allow them to make better decisions in different areas.
I will bring in here Nibal from UNESCO, who probably has something to add here. Nibal, you're muted.
Yeah, like other UN agency, and it has been said, I mean, UNESCO, which focus on the Arab state, I mean, we are also supporting Arab state in the development of their innovation policy or STI policy through either reviewing their policy or accompanying developing this policy and formulating it together with them. And also we make a kind of capacity building workshop for decision maker in the country to look at the how they have to develop their policy and strategy based on their needs and based on their objectives. Also, we make observatory for STI as well, and we help them in this regard. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Now the last question, I will leave it to Ahmad Jamal, who's been raising his hand for a while, and now please you can have that.
Thank you. You hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
Well, I would like to go in the same direction that Nibal has begun, because Nibal has full experience with the help of ISWA and other organizations. We have put a process for formulating STIPS, Science, Technology, Education Policy. There was a group created supported by UNESCO from CNRS, the National Center for Research Development, experts, and there was the creation of 4 task forces concerning, including socio-economic matters. There was 4 task forces concerning science, technology, industry, environment, biological science, medical sciences, public health, and there was the formulating of a proposal to create a kind of national observatory to implement and accompany that the development of this strategy, this policy of science and technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Okay, I think that we have exhausted the time for this discussion. We will, I think everybody that wanted to participate has been included, so I'm happy with that. And we are still on time. So let's move on now to the next presentation. The next presentation will come from UNTAD by Clovis Freire, who's going to give us some examples of how this interaction between STI, science, policy, and SDGs is being done in some countries. We'll have 2 presentations, one by Clovis Freire from UNTAD, and another one by Cornelia Sinova from UNESCO, with different examples of countries and how these connections have been done. Go ahead, Clovis.
So hello, everyone, then. So this presentation will be a counter example to illustrate 2 elements that we have highlighted so far. That is the direction of the policy towards the SDGs, so to be outcome oriented, and the other is the need for broad participation in the whole policy cycle, not only in the policy design, but also in the policy implementation. So this presentation will also highlight some of the challenges in this process, and the case study is a case study on the STI policy in Ethiopia. So the context is the following. Ethiopia is one of the fast growing economies in Africa and globally since 2003. A lot of foreign direct investment, improvements in the access to education up to the university, and great improvements in the road construction, railway network, energy. But despite the economic growth, progress in structural transformation has been limited. As many countries in Africa, Ethiopia is still essentially a rural economy. Over 70% of the population lives out of farming and other rural activities. There was a sectoral shift in terms of value added, but was largely from agriculture to low value added services and constructions, so bypassing manufacturing. So that is the context. So let me talk about directionality. In Ethiopia, the policy, the national policy is the strategy for achieving the SDGs. So this is highlighted in these many interconnections. Here we have the priority areas and many SDGs there. But if we look at this set of goals, we see that there are some common focus on SDGs 8, jobs and economic growth, 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, and SDG 12, in responsible consumption and production. But the current STI policy was formulated before this policy direction and before the SDGs. So the focus of the current STI policy is on technology transfer. That is basically a process, not on the desirable outcomes. Nevertheless, as the government implements STI policy instruments that are the actual tools, it has incorporated some of the directionality. So, for example, there is a policy instrument that has been used quite a lot. It's promotion of industrial parks. So they have target SDG 8, the 5 industrial parks built by the government has created about 45,000 jobs. SDG 9, they have been set up to attract foreign direct investment, upgrade industries, and generate exports. So one of the best known examples is the industrial park in the city of Hawassa. There are many well-known global brands, corporations that have been set up there, particularly on the global value chains of garments and textiles. And in terms of SDG 12, the industrial park in Hawassa was built as a zero liquid discharge plant. So they have a capacity to recycle the water that they use. So now let me shift to the importance of the multi-stakeholder approach, participation in STI, which highlights and emphasizes the systemic nature of the innovation, right? So we have conducted a STI policy review in Ethiopia, and this review itself was a process that engaged multiple stakeholders from government on all levels and different line ministries to firms in different sectors and within sectors along the value chain, and in particular the garment, textile, and pharmaceutical sectors that we took as examples. So if we include the representatives of labor associations, NGOs, universities, research institutes, banks, so to come up with an assessment of STI policy that reflects the views and the challenges of all these actors. So 3 main findings of the steep review that I would like to share. First, despite the rapid growth and increased FDI, progress on technological learning and innovation has been limited. The focus has been on technology transfer, but that does not automatically result in technological learning. There was little interest from the private sector in technological learning and innovation in general. So less than 1% of the firms have introduced new or better products, and only 1% have improved their technological process according to surveys. So the private sector, key stakeholder, was not engaged in the process of STI. Second, there was weak interaction among firms, between firms and R&D centers, support institutes, universities, and other actors. There was also weak links between foreign and local firms. And third, there was a mismatch between policy formulation and policy implementation. So on paper, Ethiopia has most of the policies, regulations, background studies, roadmaps needed to kickstart a successful process of technological upgrade. But in reality, as we have found in many other countries, there is a serious implementation gap. There are many reasons for that, apart from the capacity constraints, of course, and the eventual misallocation of efforts and resource. But one key one is that there's poor coordination in the implementation of the STI policy. As we will see next week with the webinar on policy instruments, many ministries and government agencies should be involved in the implementation of the STI policy. So it is a challenge to coordinate this work and engage the other actors outside the government and ensure resources and accountability and follow up on the implementation is done. So the government of Ethiopia is now working on the preparation of a new STI policy. UNTAD is supporting this process through technological advisory activities. And some of our recommendations are that first, to shift the focus from technology transfer to innovation. So the actual creation and improvement of goods and services. And second, that these goods and services that should be, and the process to create them should be actually should actually contribute to the national development goals and the SDGs. So there's this directionality. And the STI policy should be not only creating an enabling environment for innovation, but strategically guiding public and private investment that could build innovative capacities for sustainable development in the country. And third, engage all actors of the innovation ecosystem, not only in the design of the STI policy, but more importantly, on the implementation of the policy. So with that, I finish this brief presentation and look forward for our discussion and Q&A. And yeah, back to you.
Thank you, Clovis. We will now move to another set of examples, which is going to be presented by Cornelia from UNESCO. Then we will move into a discussion, the more detailed discussion about the experience. Cornelia, please.
Yes, thank you, Ludo. Can you see my screen?
Indeed, yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I will follow up with a few more examples after my colleague Clovis. To show some of the different approaches that countries that UNESCO had been working with, but also some other UN partners have been accompanying in the very recent years. Some first examples in Africa, the case of Ghana, and as also you have heard about the STI roadmap. Ghana is one of the pilot countries that is working with the UN interagency task team to develop a STI roadmap for the SDGs. And I wanted to give you examples from this approach that is happening in Ghana. In terms of governance of the process, which is led at very high level by the ministry, but also by the presidency unit for the SDGs, who are ensuring the co-chairing. There is also the STI roadmap task team, which includes representatives from different science-based ministries, but also other key STI institutions in the countries. And the case of Ghana, and I think our friend from Ghana could also talk about it, is it's interesting in terms of finding ways to have this alignment of STI and the SDGs. And the country has conducted the situational analysis so far, reviewing all the policies, explicit and implicit ones, and also identifying clear maybe gaps and also bridges with the SDGs in order to establish this directionality of the roadmap and the current policy in place. Another example from Gambia. Gambia has been putting also emphasis on the STI system to build it through a very in-depth assessment of the STI system, and focusing on actually identifying gaps in policy instruments. And this joins what Clovis has also shared on the example of Ghana. How important is also to really focus on the gaps for the policy implementation as part of this assessment of the entire system. In Gambia, there was also a great work done to mainstream also the gender perspective in the STI policy, to have it as a more inclusive STI policy, including this gender equality importance. And also the country is proceeding also with the technology needs assessment, which has also the objective to identify those technologies that would tackle specific STI related targets of the SDGs. An example on Kenya, and Kenya is also one of the 5 pilot countries that is currently working on the development of the STI roadmap for the SDGs. And here I would like to highlight some of the governance and coordination aspects and how the country has organized the development of this roadmap through, of course, involving the science line ministries, also State Department for Planning, but also having the African Center for Technology Studies to be involved in this process as a think tank. There are some assessments having been done to identify some gaps in terms of targets of the SDGs and how they can be addressed more closely by STI. Development of an STI policy. Also, Kenya has paid a great focus on integrating the gender perspective in their STI policy. Mozambique has recently completed a mapping of the STI system, which gives the basis and provides the needed evidence for further revising and adopting a new STI policy. I'm sorry, I will just again share my screen. Something happened. Yes. In the case of Mozambique, I would like to highlight also the participatory approach that has been adopted by the country to identify areas of STI investment, but also to organize in the future some online consultation, also involving provinces, not only for the revision of the policy, but its future implementation. And now I would like to show a few examples in Asia, Bhutan, and we have representatives from Bhutan also attending this workshop. I think there was a good participatory approach in terms of proceeding and having collectively proceeding with the STI system mapping. Also, Bhutan has undertaken a technology needs assessment through some online surveys in which the key STI stakeholders have been invited to participate and to reply. And all these have been integrated, this collective and participatory collective design, if I can say, in proposing some key policy recommendations for repositioning the STI system in Bhutan in the context of the SDGs. India is the next example, and India is also part of the global pilot program that the interagency task team is currently conducting in few countries. India is also building and developing the STI for SDGs roadmaps, showing some good practices in terms of coordination across departments, but also between federal and subnational level in terms of assessing the current R&D. In India, I had also pointed that the private sector participation is also has been mobilized for the development of the roadmap, notably in the health sector. Timor-Leste is also one of our examples. In Timor-Leste, we had worked with the country to have an overview of the STI system, and especially to have also the SDG perspective reviewed in terms of the current situation of the STI system. And the focus there is on key development priorities. And I think the good basis would be to really continue the work jointly with the SDG working group and the STI stakeholders involved in the STI policy process. Lastly but not least, our example is again in Asia, Uzbekistan. Recently, Uzbekistan has launched a report on their current STI system situation, mapping the entire landscape in the country in terms of STI, and which was a mapping done also with a very good participatory and involvement by many stakeholders. Also, areas of investment in STI had been identified, linking them with some SDGs specific targets. In Uzbekistan, also the legal frameworks, the policy instruments had received also a special focus in the mapping stage, and currently the country is proceeding with the development of an STI policy, for which a good mobilization of hundreds of stakeholders to participate in online surveys, so that their views and feedback can be integrated in the development of the national policy. I would like also to mention there the participation of the regions, and that the country is currently also involving and assessing the innovation potential of the different regions in the country, so that they also are a stronger player in the entire STI system. Thank you for your attention, and we will welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. In the meantime, I have a few questions in the Mentimeter for you. There are 3 questions. Now, the first question is, what are your top 3 SDGs? Okay, and let's see whether they coincide with your government or not. But tell me a bit about your priority. 21. Okay, let me tell you what was the answer when we asked what are the priorities of your government. And the 3 topics that came out first in the priorities of the government were exactly the same ones you have put as priority: health, education, and poverty. So there's very much an alignment between your personal views and what your government seems to be pursuing. That was a nice conclusion, that at least for me, that you are very much in line with your government. I will move now to the next question that we have for you. What are the top 3 priorities of the STI policy of your country? Interesting, very interesting. Now, 2 key challenges for STI and the link between STI and SDGs, with nearly the same number of participants, are design and implementation. With implementation nearly taking a quarter of all those participating, it seems this and design being the other problem. The alignment and the STI policy formulation is not that different, not as important as design and implementation, especially design of policy instruments. And indeed, this confirms actually the thinking behind this workshop, because the design of effective STI policy instruments and implementation of STI policy instruments is precisely the next session in our webinar series, because this seems to be also in our research and our experience 2 of the main difficult problems. The alignment and the STI policy formulation are important problems too, but are subordinate to the design and implementation, which take nearly 50%. Okay, now let me start moving to a couple of questions. I have here some Domingo da Silva Neto. Domingo is asking.
I'm here, yes.
Yes, you can ask. You want to ask a question?
Thank you very much. Congratulations for the presentation. My question is to Mr. Clovis Freire, Jr. I want just to understand how much better, because we in Angola, we have 2 instruments, a STIP separately and a national STI strategy. STI strategy. I would like to know what you can advise to have at the same time a document that we could call national policy and strategy, or because I saw that the example that you showed from Ethiopia, probably the instrument is only one, the STIP and at the same time the national strategy, because in the strategy usually is the tool where we can find goals and the timetable for the implementation. This is the question. Thank you.
Can I take it now?
Yes,
the question?
please,
Okay,
please,
thank you.
please.
So thank you, Domingos. It's a very, very pertinent, very important question. Actually, what we will be doing in Ethiopia is these two instruments, let's call instruments, two documents, right? So the STI policy, it gives the direction, and it has a longer time frame. It gives the direction, but doesn't give the rate of progress, you know, or the exactly marks or how to really implement the things to go in that direction. And that is through this strategy. So this strategy, the colleagues that in other countries that are doing the STI for SDG roadmaps, if the roadmaps are at that level of national level, would be something similar to this strategy. And in those, you will end up having again the formulation of the goals and mission, because you came that from the policy that gives the direction, the guidance, but then you set the pace. You set how fast you go, what are the indicators that will help you in that process, and you go much more detail that you will not do that in the policy itself. Yeah.
Yes, Jacinta. Jacinta, maybe you can come in now. Jacinta dos Santos Gutierrez. Yes, are you there? Jacinta? Are you there? No? Seems we lost her. So let me go through some of the questions. Let me just mention that there are a few questions in the chat too. For the panel, could you please point out to some of the critical mechanisms or key factors to keep stakeholders engaged in the implementation of STI policy during all the years of the policy implementation? How do you keep them interested? How do you keep them committed? What mechanisms are used in the policy process to keep stakeholders committed and engaged? The question is for Clovis, but I think it's relevant for UNESCO or UNEP.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again. This is a very important question as well. So it's interesting, in the quiz that we just have done, you saw that there was challenge there, and you saw that challenge in terms of governance. People said you said that it's 11% of you identified one of the challenges. And the implementation was like 25%. So 25% implementation, governance 11%. But actually, this is the governance process of the STI implementation is critical for the implementation of it. So in the STI policy, one mechanism that you can set up in the governance is that you have, at a higher level, you have the government setting the direction, listen to other stakeholders, but in terms of implementing this strategy, you have something more at a level that is more working level, and that includes not only the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation, but all line ministries that are related to policy instruments that affect the rate of innovation. So you have trade, you have investment, you have the planning ministry, you have education, infrastructure. All of those and others, you know, they should be part of this mechanism, a council that is related to that, and also have the participation of of key elements of the private sector, the priority sectors that the government want to promote. So this, during the policy cycle, this may change. You know, the direction is the same, as to diversify the economy, but the potential new sectors, for example, that you try to diversify, change over time. So this is a process that's a continuous process of dialogue between government and all the actors that are involved on the innovation process. So the mechanism that we suggest is to have some kind of council that has a more working level implementation of this strategy. Over to you, Ludo.
Yeah. Cornelia or Pierre, do you want to add something?
Yes, thank you, Ludo. From a science perspective, I think the answer is the same as what Clovis has said. It's very important to have clear and I would say frequent communication with the policy community and the scientists to keep them engaged. Normally, in the way that we produce science for decision making, everybody's contributing free of charge. They're contributing their time away from their families, away from their regular jobs, to this particular effort. And if they lose interest because you haven't been in touch with them for quite some time, it's the easiest way for the whole thing to fall apart. So I think it's the same answer. You have to have a body that is regularly being contacted, being asked for advice, and inputting into the process to be able to keep the interest level high.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. Cornelia?
Yes, thank you very much, Ludo. Yes, I would just like to echo what Clovis and Pierre has just answered. And maybe what I would like to add is the importance also of developing an implementation plan that is also appropriately budgeted for everything that it's really actionable and practical oriented. The policy, as we said, gives the orientation, the directionality, but this importance of also having the right mechanisms, the means that also gives the possibility to have an effective implementation, design the necessary policy instruments that will allow proper implementation is also very important. And of course, to constantly involve all the stakeholders that need to be taking part in the process of implementation, because the STI policy concerns so many different actors involved. Thank you.
I'll ask a colleague from UNTAN, Michael Anthony Lim. Maybe Anthony, you can come in now.
Hi, Ludo. Thank you.
Hi.
Since you make the invitation to add on additional comments to what Clovis and Cornelia have mentioned, and also a colleague from UNEP, in terms of the implementation, it's actually, I think there is no bulletproof method to ensure the involvement of stakeholders in implementation. It's a very, very thorny issue. Most countries are doing quite a poor job in terms of monitoring what is going on with respect to implementation. But I think a couple countries that have done a reasonable job, they have tried to establish some type of monitoring and evaluation mechanism, which can be effective. It's hard to do maybe, but also establishing key performance indicators, KPIs, and some data and metrics that can go along. Adding these into the strategy will help, but I don't think it's a guarantee still. That's my 5 cents.
Okay. Okay. So, I will add with a couple of additional questions that came through the chat. I will add here. There's a question on the experience on Ethiopia. address to Clovis, because you,
Thank you very much to the colleague Simon Peter that asked that is very, very important question, really. So when I was making in the example of Ethiopia, I said that the shift from technology transfer to innovation, and I want to really go a little bit on that aspect. So the question is that shall we least developed countries may need to do the technology transfer first. So there is may need to have a balance act between technology transfer and innovation. So that's the question. So the way that I understood. So what I want to say is that the innovation, we have to have in mind that innovation doesn't need to have new to the world things being created in the country. Least developed countries are countries that are not diversified. They produce very few products in the country, import the majority of the things. They are very much rely on very few commodities, usually agricultural commodities or low value added manufacturing, such as garment. So these countries need to diversify the economy. That diversification could be products that are very simple and traditional and are everywhere in other countries, but are not produced on that country. So it's an innovation in that country. What I'm trying to say is that the focus should not be in bringing the machine to produce. Technology transfer, that usually is done through importation of capital goods. So it's not only in bringing the machinery, but really on thinking on what are the new products that the economy can produce. What are the new products that can diversify the economy? And when you think about that, you may end up to having to bring a machine to do that. You may have to do the technology transfer, but it's not the technology transfer the objective. It's just a means to be able to innovate. So that's what I was saying. And it's interesting to see the results of the Mentimeter when we ask you to say what are the objectives of the STI policy. It's very high, this building scientific capacity of the country. In a way, that reflects a thinking of innovation of STI as a linear process, that you need science and then that will generate technology and that technology will generate innovation. And actually we know that it's a much more interlinked and systemic process. A lot of innovation that will not require new science. A lot of innovation will not require developing a new technology. May only require to be able to import some machinery. So at the end of the day, the innovation, it was a very low as an objective, and perhaps the country should bring much more upfront the innovation as one objective. I'll stop here, Ludo.
Thank you very much. There's a question also in the chat for Cornelia. We're on time still. Cornelia, in Mozambique, you can read the question. We are now revising the STI policy after STI mapping. What are the lessons learned from Gambia and India regarding stakeholders coordination, interministerial coordination, and a private sector participation that can be used in Mozambique?
Yes, thank you, Ludo, and thank you very much for this question. Thank you, Sergio, for asking this question. I would be happy to reply and also to possibly put you in contact also, because I think sharing experience is really also the objective of this session. What I could say is that in the case of Ghana and Gambia, and I know less about India because I included as an example, but it was the World Bank that has closely followed the process there. But in the first two countries, actually, I would say that the coordination could be at two levels. One that is high level political, that ensure really the commitment and the political kind of driving force to the process. And then coordination also at a more technical level where key stakeholders are really engaged, but from different horizons and from different institutions, possibly including also private sector. And private sector, I think, is where we need more involvement of actors and producers that really could also come with different perspectives on the STI development part. But I would say these coordination mechanisms at high level, and at the same time to have really working groups that involve different representatives. For instance, and Dr. Kwaya from Ghana can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Ghana also the process for the actual drafting and development of the roadmap would be organized in different groups. Different groups according to their to the different chapters of the roadmap will be drafted and developed, co-designed by different working groups. Which really involve also youth professional associations and guaranteeing this good participatory mechanisms. I hope I answered your question, but I think it would be good also to establish some direct links with the country representatives to really exchange on some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, I want to end up here with Jacinta dos Santos Gutierrez, who's in Timor-Leste, very far away from all of us, and very late for her too. So I would like to end this question, if she's still around, because she had lost a connection, but she's back. Jacinta, are you there? Well, I think that the chat is not finished. How to approach STI policy from a national level? Clovis, you can give a very 2-3 bullet point recommendations of how to approach STI policy at a national level.
No, yes. So
3 bullet points, huh?
Right. So that's if I understand correctly, question. In a way, of course, the STI policy as our national policy will be addressed at the national level, but is not the responsibility only of the Science, Technology, Innovation Ministry. It has to involve the other ministries as well in the setting up this policy, because as well it has to give the direction of the STI towards the national goals and the priority SDGs of the country. So that has to have that alignment, and we'll end up also having guidance related to areas of the government that usually are not only what we consider science, technology. So there will be things related to education, things related to how to deal with environment or approach certain technologies related to environment if you go to sustainability, and so on and so forth. So I would say how to approach is to have a multi-stakeholder approach to STI policy at the national level.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clovis. I will just try to close with some of the key points that I picked up from this session very quickly, and then we'll move to some final questions, Mentimeter questions, to see to go to as a way of concluding. First, the first main point I got is from the first presentation is the STI systemic, and in a way it has been repeated by Clovis now by saying that we have to coordinate many agencies. Because it's systemic, you have to coordinate many agencies, and this is a recurrent point that I will also raise in the next session. Something I picked up from Pierre's presentation is the importance of evidence-based, less subjective and biased science. That's critically important. We are facing a period over the world where science is losing its value because it's many times even politicized too much. So going back to evidence-based, solid sciences as a basis of decision is critically important, and I think we should not overlook that. We should also have achievable and action-oriented objectives. It's very important that whatever actions we have, whatever instruments we use are actionable and have very, very, very clear objectives. Fourth point that I found out important was the issue of people-centered. They have an inclusiveness, multi-stakeholders approach that brings everybody into the process, not selectively, but everybody. And finally, we also need monitoring and evaluation processes, because this is the only way that we can learn lessons, extract lessons, and improve our policy process in the future. Before I end, I want to make just two requests. The first request I want to make is to all of you. We have one more question for you on one more final question, which is on the screen now. Please use 2 words to describe what you consider as the key aspects of STI policies for SDGs. Yeah, 2 words to describe what you consider are the key aspects or policies, or the policies, key aspects of policy. Look at here, the most important one seems to be stakeholder engagement, although alignment also seems to be used. There's some words that are emerging also in the chat. Collaboration, cooperation emerges as important also. So if you look at the center of is alignment, stakeholder engagement, and coordination to seem to be the aspects of policies that are important. And would like to mention that in the next webinar next week will be focused on 2 issues. It will be focused on STI policy instruments, design and implementation. The 2 main challenges according to the web eventing survey that we made a few minutes ago. And that so we will try to address those 2 issues, the design and the implementation of STI policies for SDGs.
I just wanted to suggest that before we leave, we turn on our cameras and we can take a joint picture of all of us. If you are still here, just switch on your camera and we can take a short picture. Thank you. See you next week. Thank you.
I still, but without the tie already.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Excellent.
Hello, Domingos.
Bye. Bye. I will shut out now. Bye.
Bye.